The youngest daughter of Asheville had caused to journey to distant Fenelon, where she would winter at that land's lord's castle and rejoin her intended, that lord's own son. The two longed to be together again, and for the spring, where lay their wedding day. 50 knights from the Manticore order, attended by their 50 young squires, would journey with the princess and safeguard her round the Lake of Souls to Fenelon's shires. With speed the company could hope to come to their journey's end ere autumn was done.
With a vibrant yet melancholy parade, the folk of Asheville's capital bade farewell to their much-loved princess, and bade her be safe, and know naught but joy where she went to dwell. A great column, her carriage in the middle, left the city to tunes of pipes, drums, and fiddles. 10 days the company would need to ride to reach Fenelon, and for the first 3 no trouble came their way from any side, save above. The cold rain fell repeatedly. Yet some hours ere the dawn of the 4th day, while a lake's edge, the company was waylaid.
There was no subtlety to the screaming foe, who charged on horse or foot o'er the field. All the same, the sentries' urgent horns did blow, and all readied armour, weapons, and shields. There was no sigil, no herald came ahead of this horde, only screams before them sped. The knight captain ordered a shield wall, to form a bulwark twixt carriage, lake, and screamers. Therein huddled the princess and handmaids all, wherein the reavers would die ere they entered. The darkness gave scant clue of these raiders, save their numbers, which looked almost treble theirs.
Raising his sword, he called over the howling tide. Where these wretches be, we will break them. Sense and strategy with us solely reside, judging from the shrieks of these feckless men. No harm shall come to the princess today. Let's end this nonsense, and then be on our way. The cavalry struck first, unsaddled riders clad in wolfskin and armed with meagre spears. As the captain guessed, this wave fared the worst. Their horses cut from under them, their breasts pierced. No pause for breath was there between this fray and the mob which followed in numbers great.
These were a fiercer lot than those before. Stouter, broader, better armoured and armed, with heavy cleavers and cruel, spike-tipped mauls, which dealt the knights and squires their first harms. Yet still the wall held, and the raiders knew loss to the warriors they had dared to cross. Yet no unthinking barbarians were these, and the Manticores did not watch for cunning, allowing a sneak to slip by with ease. Sudden screams told them the carriage was burning. The squire in the rear slew the arsonist, yet flames proved a new, flanking foe to resist.
Handmaids in panic burst through the carriage door, some with their skirts or their dresses ablaze, and this drew focus from the Manticores whose chivalry compelled many to aid. Distraction was the doom of many a knight. Divided attention cost them the fight. In moments the battle had turned to chaos. Unendurable was the raiders' press, and in this madness with all surely lost, a lone squire's eyes caught sight of the princess. A raider, caked in blood, advanced upon her, with no thought in his mind but murder.
Duty seized the squire's brain, honour his heart. He ran forward and slashed with his iron sword. The brigand's throat one desperate cut did part, and he dropped down to spread grief and death no more.
Princess, I implore you, come with me. In flight lies the only hope for safety.
She grabbed the hand he offered, and the two ran over death and horror at their feet, making for the distant, disturbing gloom of dark woodlands, the best chance for retreat. Neither could then fathom that the woods they saw had not been there merely moments before.
Luck beyond sense appeared to favour them, for no challenge nor pursuit hindered their flight. Only death screams and horrid laughter chased them as they vanished into the dwindling night. Devoid of breath and strength, the two at last came to woods, dark, twisted, freezing, cheerless and grey. For a time the princess and squire rested. There was nothing else their bodies could do. But soon the squire stood, though his limbs protested. "We dare not hope they're not still hunting for you. We must head north, princess, for then we should reach Castle Adjtan, some way beyond this wood."
Stunned, starved, and still exhausted, the princess stood, seeing the wisdom in this desperate plan.
With some luck there's some forageable fare good for eating, though. Naught seems alive in this land.
The princess had a fondness for woods and forests, and knew their ways. Yet none looked as dead as this. The two shambled northwards for a mile, to warn to mark the grey dawn overhead, finding no food but mushrooms green and vile. If they ate one, they would surely fall dead. Ghostly calls in the air breezed round their ears, a chilling thing, if they had but wit to hear.
At last something stood out midst the sea of trees, a dwelling as grey and cheerless as the boughs. It looked deserted, yet still somehow neat, as if it was by age alone worn down. Perhaps a forester's house in bygone days. Perhaps a store of nuts or seeds remained. Wordless they walked towards an unlatched door, feeling now, above all else, the wind and cold as ghostly whispers sounded more and more. But the two cared not what freezing echoes told. The squire opened the door and searched inside a moment ere the princess followed behind.
The door slammed shut when both had stepped inside, and in the lightless room, hands grabbed at the two. Neither could resist. Indeed, neither could find aught but darkness. There was nothing they could do. They were bound and gagged and borne deeper into the snare of a house they had stumbled into. The squire's sword was flung away. His shield he had lost in the middle of the battle. Though he struggled, his body could but yield to a fate likely heinous and fatal. He wondered, almost idly, if at last he would learn aught of the foe ere he passed.
The princess did not struggle, nor did she speak, knowing their freedom would not come that way. She would not deign to tremble, weep, nor shriek, but trust her status to keep them somewhat safe. Woodland bandits, she believed these must be, and her ransom would require her safety. They were shoved hard against a cold wooden wall. An instant later, something else grabbed them. The hands of a creature not human at all, the chief denizen of this darkened den. It held their heads like new-picked lettuce from a farm, and blindly felt their faces with thumbs and palms.
"What has come to me?"
spoke a nightmare voice, the whispering hiss of a demon it seemed.
"On the eve of reaping night, is this fate's choice? Will I find an inch of worthiness in their screams? Well, we have many hours left to see if you can surprise me, the Shadow's Queen."
The gags were wrenched from the captives' mouths, and the princess, clinging to her reason like a charm against monsters, tried to speak out.
I am the prince!
At once her tongue was pinioned, held between two freakish, icy fingers, which squeezed until her voice no longer stood.
There are no names in this old house, my dear.
The voice spoke, anger colouring each foul word.
No names, nor titles matter when I am near. I'll suffer none but my own to be heard. I am Queen Isbayet, the mistress of tests, and the two of you are my latest guests.
Leave her be, you craven coward, leave her be! The squire's shout rent the air, if not the dark. Whate'er your sick whims, squander them on me, and let the innocent maid depart. Excruciating silence was the reply. Naught could he hear, and still naught could he spy.
At last, in the distance, the door opened, and a thin sliver of grey light could be seen.
I could release her, boy. But what then? What then? Would you condemn her to a death slow and mean? No food, no water, set to wander my woods. Let it be so, boy, if you believe it good.
The squire had no answer. He stood still, staring at the distant light, willing it come, and bring with it sunshine and horizons till they were borne back to civilization. But it stayed where it was, of course, and the black around them fled not for one puny crack. Isbayet spoke again.
The only succour you may henceforth enjoy shall come from me. Here in my realm, you get what you suffer for. And in truth, even death won't set you free. So come on, speak up, boy. Is her freedom best? Or should she stay with us and face the tests?
The princess made to speak again,
I will stay.
but once more her mouth was held.
Did I ask you? No. Now shush, lest I take your tongue away. It falls to this uppity wretch to choose.
You heard her, the squire said with some delay, and guilt o'erwhelming his defiance. She stays.
Hear that, my children? Perhaps this reaping night shall bring humour to our home, even if any true worthiness it lacks.
A fell chorus of hissing snickers and groans answered their mother from all directions.
Now, first things first, a test of incisions.
The chorus laughed. The captive's eyes grew wide.
Here's how this test works, my young friends. Listen well. I have 3 spikes of twisting shadow glass to drive 'neath your skin. The pain shall be that of the hell. Now, who will volunteer to take the first?
Me,
The squire whispered.
I will. Do your worst. With no pause, the spike was plunged into his knee, a numinous, writhing tool of torment. It caused no true and lasting injury, yet he felt as if his very soul were rent. His screams and anguish were impossible. His mind endured only by powers terrible. A single minute passed, though it felt much longer by far for the squire. Yet at last the pain faded, and his body slowly felt stronger, though by mundane wear and hunger it still waned. He lay bound and twitching upon the floor.
That was one, my lad. Remember, I've two more.
The steel of the squire's voice was shattered. Yet, when he'd recovered enough to speak, his heart stayed strong for all that he suffered, and his Manticore's spirit was not made weak.
I take the second spike, and the third.
There was a pause, and then came the second spur.
Somehow, this unendurable torment exceeded what had come moments before, and seemed to take longer ere it was spent, ere groans rather than screams sounded from the floor. The spur, like the first, vanished once it had wrought its wretched work, and inhuman misery brought.
The third spike will be worse than those two, by far. And you'll never be fully free of its pain. Your body and soul it shall forever mar, and your youth and grace you'll never regain. Yet, say the word, and the girl shall take the sting. Have you not had enough of suffering?
Should I explain a knightly oath and duty? I think I'd waste my breath. It's her I serve. For her I fight or bleed. For her I'll suffer these pains and my death. But what means that to such a monster as you? I'll take the third spike, as honor bids me to. The princess clenched her eyes shut as once more the beastly screeching filled the lightless house. The horror of it shook her to her core, but she knew she must fight it, not play the pinned mouse. Hope in this nightmare would prove scarce as light, unless she could devise some way to fight. Neither inspiration nor clarity came to her, though she struggled for both. Nonetheless, when the scream stopped, mercifully, she summoned up hope, and silent swore this oath.
We shall not be lost to this terrible fate. A monster's sadism to suffer and sate.
The Queen's hand touched the Squire's trembling face, yet now it felt different to before. almost human, almost warm. Slowly she traced her fingers o'er his brow, by anguish worn.
Perhaps you are of greater worth than you look, but stronger souls before, by a weakness, were still hooked. It's almost reaping night, my dears. And when night comes, the fate of those whom destiny does choose becomes mine to pick. Here, in my kingdom, your flesh and souls and hope, all you shall lose. Yet, should you curry my favor ere night, this dark realm is your salvation, not your blight. The worthiest stay neath my roof and enjoy unending dark revelries by my side. The rest languish out there. Their insect cries annoy the ears of mortals, begging them not to step inside. In cold dreariness, their souls are fettered. Their simpering cowardice warrants no better. But listen to me, wasting this merry day with all my talk. It's time we test you, girl. A fitting test of terrors I'll send your way, uninterrupted by your sacrificial drill. I'll leave you a moment to rest and prepare. Then we'll see what nightmares, if any, you dare.
The princess felt something untie her wrists, and then there were no sounds in the darkness, save the squire's breathing, a faint, tormented hiss, testament to the cost of the monster's test. She edged along the floor towards the sound, until an armored shoulder her searching hand found.
Are you still with me, Sirrah?
She asked him. A pained and distant grunt was her answer.
I need you to stay strong. No matter how grim things seem, we must resist this together. She must have some weakness. There must be a way for us to best this beast ere the end of day.
The squire coughed horridly when he tried to speak. The screams of earlier had ravaged his voice. Yet at last he said in a quavering creak,
The people shall yet find cause to rejoice when the runners bring news of your wedding and this cursed demon queen's beheading.
The princess blinked desperately at bitter tears, remembering the joy at journey's end that should have been, not this travesty trapped here, a lifetime or more with evil to spend. No, whate'er reaping night was, 'twas not yet come. Their souls and their hopes were not yet undone.
How are your wounds?
She forced herself to ask.
I know a little of healing and remedies. It's too dark in this foul place for such a task. But once we come to light, Some pain I might ease.
I will be strong enough, my lady. This I swear.
And with that oath, he was no longer there.
She called for the squire. Something else answered.
He'll bear no more pain for you. Pretty.
Meat.
Nothing will keep you from me. Pretty treasure. Such lovely hair. So young a face. They'll fit me. The rest of you can sustain me for a month as piece by piece by piece I roast and munch.
The princess' head snapped around to face the worst of all voices she had heard so far. Her mind's eye saw perfectly the disgrace in barely human form, which fain tear her apart. She shrieked on instinct and ran blindly away, heedless of anything except escape.
And to her muddled senses was shown a hope, for the door to the woods now stood open, and the wintry light without through the darkness groped, and the princess turned to flee the horrid den.
By all means, pretty meat, flee. Thus prove yourself unworthy to our queen.
The truth of this waylaid her panic somewhat, though the lure of the door remained beastly strong. Sense enough broke through. She would only be caught, and her heart endured enough to know flight was wrong. The squire had endured so much for her. She could not simply leave him to suffer. Yet noble intentions would not spare her life, nor was the urge to escape overcome. Thought was a whisper in a torrent of strife. There seemed nothing at all of good to be done. Her feet edged closer to the open door, but struck something, and she tripped and fell to the floor.
Trying to right herself, her shaking hand felt a shaft of metal wrapped in leather. Judging it soon, she held it as she did stand. Luck, perhaps, had brought the squire's sword to her, and as if the sword were a key to a cage, its presence unleashed all the princess's rage.
Anger, whose like she had never before felt, burned away everything of panic and fear. It burned so hot that all else could but melt.
You want my face, hag? By all means, come here! I'll skewer you first, and then I'll take your head. Then I'll rend your mistress and turn these shadows red!
Laughter sounded then from every shadow, and the open door closed with a mocking creak. The princess's panic once more did grow, as outrage and hate from her blood then seeped. An unseen force wrenched the sword from her grasp, and feebly after it her hands did clasp.
Queen Isveat's hands, 3 at least, grabbed her shoulders, and the princess froze, her skin crawling with dread.
Better than most maids I've tested. But perhaps, had you not found this sword, you'd have fled. Still, like your servant, there might be hope for you. I hope it proves so. My daughters are too few.
The impression of the terror from her test faded from the princess's shaken mind.
I think we can spare some more time for rest,
spoke the queen's inhuman voice from behind. The hands left her, and silence reigned again, but soon and sure would come new horrors and pain.
Overwhelmed, she fell to her knees. Full spent was her vigour, little remained of her wits, but to her tears the returned squire's ears bent, and he called out,
Prithee, my lady, fight it. By your own counsel, and by some instinct I know, we must not yield to this hateful foe.
On withered legs and in horrid pain he crawled, following the sounds of misery and pain, till he knelt beside where the princess lay sprawled. To hear her grief, more than all, made his heart wane.
A bride to be should not know such sorrow. Lord Fernil still awaits beyond the winter snows.
A sudden swat like a blow from a stave struck the squire squarely upon the back. A withering scream of horrid pain he gave, and fell to the floor like a heavy sack.
I said before,
Isveat said in anger.
No name save my own in this place shall be heard. For names like with flesh you no longer have need, for reaping night is drawing steadily near. Then shadows or wraiths thereafter you shall be, despairing without or rejoicing in here. So foul the air, not with superfluous names, or face my displeasure and far greater pains.
The princess sat up, and though she felt weak, a fire had returned to her voice when she spoke.
Yet, why do names disturb you so? When we speak a name, it's as if some panic of yours we stoke.
A hand grabbed the princess's head and squeezed, hard enough to draw out a ghastly scream.
Emma!
Called the squire as loud as he could, and the princess's pain faltered slightly.
Emma. Not my name, rest assured, but my wife's, or I should say, my wife-to-be, when home I once more see.
A blow to the gut halted his hopeful words, but from the queen's grasp the princess now stirred.
Thea!
She yelled into the darkness with zeal.
I am the Princess Thea of Asheville.
The rage of the demon she could almost feel.
I was named for my great-aunt, by my mother's will.
And I am Squire Tanith of the Manticores,
wheezed the grinning squire on the cold stone floor.
The queen's children swarmed them then, holding them fast, closing their mouths with unbreakable grips, till the wrathful queen snarling spoke at last.
From any hope of favor you have slipped. What hours remain here night shall now be used to see how much cruelty we can squander on you.
well done.
Spoke a ghostly whisperer from somewhere.
I was a squire once too. And my lord Baron James of Verne is out there in the woods. The Queen's tests and sport he scorned.
The speaker seemed as surprised as his kith. Such forbidden memories to part with.
The Queen screamed in outrage. Her children flailed like shadows near a flickering candle flame.
Ophelia,
This was a strange whispered wail in Tanith's ear.
around 20 days, I was claimed.
I was driven here by reavers, enticed to strike our caravan. By her.
The Queen howled for silence as these shadows' names sounded one after the other, yet not all spoke theirs. For some, her loyal children remained, and strove to stifle any further gall. Chaos and confusion was the result, and just a handful of names were at fault. The grasp around the princess soon slackened, as if the shadows holding her were jostled. She twisted free, and with her mouth unpinioned, she called aloud her father's name.
Bertrand!
Bertrand?
Echoed the shadow's voice.
'Twas the name of my son, forgotten here, to my endless shame.
Speak on, everyone who can.
Came a distant yell.
The names are changing something in this realm. Any that you can recall, pray you, tell them now. Perchance the darkness will overwhelm.
At once this voice became a scream unnatural. Until all was silence in the hateful hall.
You two have compelled me to kill my child. A child who you poisoned against me. This holy night and happy home you've defiled. Now face the vengeance of the Shadows Queen.
No words can describe that demon's sheer fury, and yet her words were marked by uncertainty.
And then, once more, the door to the house opened. Yet somehow it seemed wider, and the light brighter, which against the numinous dark did now contend, though far too much by blackness stayed smothered.
Go! Now's your chance, my lady. Get out of here! Fly!
He turned back towards where he'd heard Isvayet.
Gregory, Knight Captain of Ishvil's Manticores, slain by your contrivance, I do not doubt it, along with worthy knights and squires 50. To them I dedicate every bite and sting that their good names to your wretched ears ring. Robert, Squire to Nathaniel Latall. Harold, Squire to his father, Harold. Eric, Squire of the Minstrel Knight, Strange Hall. James, the Laughing Squire of Adam the Cold.
'Twas all Tanith could speak, ere fell his doom, for a hand like a spear delivered his death wound.
In truth, he'd hoped the names of his brothers and all their masters would buy time sufficient for the princess to flee. He prayed fortune guide her to a kinder fate than that he'd soon be sent. Yet perhaps it would be what Isvayet described. Even so, any hope of hope lay outside. The princess did indeed run to the door, yet went no further than the hall's threshold.
Spirits without! Hear me! If you'd have no more of torment, then now let your names be told. Names have power to hurt the Shadows Queen. Remember them, shriek them, and be set free.
the windy writhing of the woodland ghosts already stirred to rare excitement by the discomfort of their hated host around the house as a swirling gale bent. A mess of names, 1,000 macabre whispers battered the walls, the door, the roof, and rafters. Queen Isveat howled foremost in terror, her faithful thralls outnumbered and overcome. The overwhelming darkness was conquered even by the humble light of autumn's sun. The princess felt the ground shake beneath her feet. The ground was parting, the demon's house to eat. Princess Thea turned back to face the hall, seeking the squire who'd borne such harm for her, seeking to save him ere the house would fall, to drag him outside. They would flee together. But a shadow enveloped her searching eyes, whilst another grabbed her wrists and pulled her outside. These two shadows did not long survive outside, perishing at once to the light's dread touch. But ere she could make for the door to find the squire, he came to her in the shadow's clutch. Gaunt and grey and lifeless was his body, the last of her guard, come to death and glory. Less than a second was spared for sorrow, for a new, impossible strangeness came. The titanic tree rose arrow-swift below the house, in her try splitting it in twain. For all this madness the princess felt at peace. By numinous whispers she was coaxed to sleep. These voices in her mind, whispering comfort, were so at odds with the violence before her eyes. Nonetheless, such was their power that in short order, in her no grief nor fear could bide.
The names you spoke were the key to my jail. Now rest, dear child, whilst rightness prevails.
The princess slept right through the reaping night, a horror banished from the kingdom evermore, and woke feeling fed and healthy with the dawn's light, in a woodland by summer's grace adorned. Beside her lay the valiant guardian, no longer twisted, he was himself again. So too was he alive, for as the princess shook him madly by the shoulders, his sleep was done, and he knew but a moment's distress, searching for the wound that pierced him deep. But soon he realized that wound was closed, the pain was gone, his healthy skin resewn. Silently, the two looked around at the scene of unreasonable summer. Some small piece of their troubled minds worried they were deceived, that this was some contrivance of the beast. Yet their hearts knew, past doubt, the darkness was done, and soon they found proof in the Shadow's Queen, pinioned. One last unspeakable thing remained in the woods. A tree of strange and senseless proportions. From this shape, and howls within, they understood this tree was to be Isveat's dungeon. Squire Tanith saw something twitch about the bough. Through a crack, one oversized grey eye he found. Almost in answer to the squire's staring, a rustle of leaves preceded a sudden surge of ivy. Around the mad tree it went, masking it all from sight, and smothering the queen's dirge. The princess pulled him back from the ghastly tree.
Leave it, my friend. It's time for us to leave.
Fear nothing more from the Reaper's woods, young ones,
spoke the voice which soothed Thea earlier. The two turned and saw a shining woman. Warmth and peace seemed to radiate from her.
By the torrent of names which you begun, the curse of these golden woods is undone. The demon whose deceits brought darkness here shall stay pinioned 1 lifetime for each life she stole, and after that another 1,000 years, left to languish in that ill-shaped tree's bole. But no more of darkness now, my young friends, for your courage has halted through the dark ends. No doubt you have questions,
said this shining lady.
Yet time dwindles, and soon these woods must depart for another world, with my first new bounty, and once more I'll mend regrets by my healing arts. But you two, living as you are, must leave here, ere this realm can no longer tarry here.
She bade the two follow her through the woods. All thorns and nettles parted before them.
Well, before all else, I suppose I should introduce myself, and this realm I tend. I am Sherwist, the Healer Queen, the Reaper. In this place I help souls that unjustly suffer.
They passed a wicker basket atop a rock, and the Healer Queen reached down to take it. As they walked on, she would pick fruit to stock the vessel, far more than would seem it could fit.
Just 1 berry shall sustain you half a day. Something so small in your world can remain. I first came here from a world you will never know. A curious girl, treading a foreboding path. And the first thing I found brought me such woe. A sense of carnage, a battle, matchless wrath. So many were dead, and all of their souls ached with regret and pain. These possessed them whole. I fled back home, which has known no misery for 10,000 years, and yet the joys of my world could not drown out the wrongness I had seen, and to that biting wrongness my heart unfurled. Many counseled, and more implored me remain, but I am noble-born. They could not bar my way. On the night, which would be known as Reaping Night, I travelled to your world and found these woodlands. By dawn I had moulded a pocket of delights, and led 1,000 new dead souls here by the hand. These were the war dead, the murdered, the young, those whose lives were over, though barely begun. A year they'd spend in my world, in this fief, receiving recompense for the unfairness of their deaths. I eased grudges, regrets, and grief, then returned them the next year, renewed and blessed. These souls were then ready to pass on to where their souls belong, to fates proper and true.
They came to a river of fresh water beside which grew a young and sturdy tree. Dangling from a low-hanging branch, there were a brace of small, filled, leather-bound canteens.
For the journey to come, these will sustain you. Just 1 sip is all you need the whole day through.
It was a moment before Sherwist spoke on, and when she did, her eyes dropped to the ground.
The Shadow's Queen, and let her name be gone from all minds henceforth, a curse upon its sound. Were it not for your right to an answer, no time nor memory I'd deign grant her. She came here as a refugee, and no shadow was she at first, but a mighty queen whose kingdom lay far, far away on a world unknown, even to me. Yet she'd fled this dominion. She claimed it fell to shadows, and a king whose mad ambition is to eat everything. Mere lunacy, to be certain, I've no doubt, from her glut of pride and matchless vanity. She was a tyrant whose people cast her out, and her lost throne drove her to insanity. Still, when she shambled here, directionless, and fraught. I gave the compassion I believed she'd sought. I did not see the evil within her heart, beneath the misery on the outside. I never thought I'd need to be on guard, and was glad at first to see her heartache subside. But then, at once, she turned her greedy eyes to the refuge which now vexed her reborn pride. She murdered me, and with a craven spell, befitting a deposed beast in exile, she poisoned my woods and left them in the shell you beheld. Just as you beheld the vile games she played in this parody of hell. My people cast her out, so too the woods, exiled again, drifted where she could.
The princess and squire had been transfixed by every word the shining lady said. But to one point of confusion, Thea risked a question.
Pardons, my lady, but you're not dead. If the monster murdered you as you claimed, how is it you're here, in your woods reclaimed?
The rules of my kind and world are not your own. Suffice it to say, my life was regained in the same way the trees here were regrown. Names, facts, truths, these broke the usurper's chains. You could not truly understand our ways unless you dwelt here, and the living cannot stay. She compounded her malice with deceit, and as her evil twisted my lance, so too she was twisted by wrathful nature to the meat shadowed form of the villain you lately knew. But this, she told herself, was her own design, to hide from the king who in all things dined. For 1,000 years she has hunted for life, on yours and a dozen worlds ill-fortuned. Reaping night became a time of horror and strife, and thousands upon thousands she stole and doomed. Yet behind each soul was a name, and the tide of names you released made her horror die.
I fain would know, Lady Sherwist, Tanith said, what power is in names to bring such change, with such speed? With such a weapon the dead cast off, in moments, their bane and her phage. It seems at the end so simple, yet how had they not overcome her thus, till now?
Their power was rejection. Each name symbolized a life not hers to snatch. Enough names empowered nature to resist, and each name spoke, left more names easier to catch, for her shadows blinded more than the eyes, but buried the names within her victims' minds. Others have resisted, but not till now, were the numbers or the luck sufficient to bring the faithless thing of shadows down. But alas, young ones, our time is nearly spent. Soon we'll reach the wood's edge, so let us end this dreadful day with fairer talk, my friends.
That would seem wise counsel to me, said a voice which caused Tanith to snap his head round in shock, to see a sight to make his heart rejoice. It was Knight Captain Gregory, sat on a rock. This blessed lady conveyed us all here, and here we are well, Tanith, never fear.
As are we,
said another voice, and Thea turned to see her handmaids, every one of them, and at the forefront stood Henrietta, who was the closest of her childhood friends.
we all died in the chaos, my lady. Yet, here we've come. I pray you, do not weep.
Of the barbarians who cut us down, I'm told most killed each other. They were pilgrims. It was their hope to be bound in the shadows beside some presumed fell mother. But only a handful could come before her, thus thought the fools, and thus the test of murder.
They are dealt with, alive and dead. No more harm shall they cause to anyone. No more shall reaping night beget death and dread. Your world needs no such excuse for ghastly war. But here we come to the border. Now 'tis time for us all to bid final thanks and goodbyes.
The trees thinned and at last parted before a stretch of meadow coloured by autumn frost, a jarring sight beside the woodlands bright and warm, but at least a road was near, they'd not get lost. A fallen squire spoke. A week or so will see you to a village. It was my home. Our families must be told of our end. And don't forget, bold squire, you must protect and attend the princess still. Yet of that none here fret. You have surpassed expectation and example. I'd knight you now, if I knew where my sword did fall.
I wish I could see your wedding, Thea. But I shall be content to hear you tell its tale in the far future, after the long years of your life are spent.
The princess hugged her friend, who said cheerfully,
Don't be sad. This is not the last time we'll meet.
More assembled souls stepped up to say farewell, until Sherwood spoke at last.
We've no more time. This place must return to the world where it dwells, until those choice nights, when the veil unwinds. Just one final gift have I for you first. I shall counter the cold, like with hunger and thirst.
She plucked 2 hairs from her head, and with no pause nor cause beyond her sure-fast will, they grew into shining cloaks, stretching to the floor, and these she handed to the living two.
You shall feel nothing but lovely summer, so long as these hang about your shoulders. And lastly, dear saviors, go with the thanks of every soul saved and avenged by the wrack you began by your strength in the foulest, dank prison that uncounted hopes and hearts has sacked. Perhaps we'll meet again. Your long happy lives might, with some luck, come to fated ends on reaping night.
With that she was gone, as were the others, and the squire and princess knew in their bones they must, with all haste, leave the woods and return to the world and lives and futures which were their own. As soon as they stepped on the frosty ground, the reaper's forest was nowhere to be found. The princess and squire looked around to see no single trace of the enchanted woods, just the open meadows and some distant trees whose leaves had turned brown, as well in autumn they should. Yet the gifts given by the shining lady remained, and made no secret of their majesty.
For a long time they both stood deathly still, released as they were by both dream and nightmare. With all their company both saved and killed, they found they could do little but stand and stare. It was so much for a mortal mind to take, and 'gainst it the mortal world could only grate. And yet, even there at the earliest, thoughts of homes and weddings would not be silent, and the grasp of dreams, good and bad, would desist in due course, as through their lives they both went.
Let us be gone,
said Princess Thea at last,
before much more of this strange day has passed.
Squire Tanith was shaken from his stupor by the princess's words. He nodded and shook his stationary limbs. Then he reached for the basket and made to move, yet soon took a curious blow to the foot. Looking down, he saw a Manticore's sword hilt on the ground. "This is mine, past question," he said, noticing familiar scratches about the leather. "I lost it miles hence, by my reckoning. This must be one final good turn from her." He turned to face the princess, and his eyes, like hers, were overburdened with surprise. "I could stay sane within all that madness, but to think on it in these same surrounds gnaws at me maddeningly. Nevertheless, by your command, let's be rid of this frosty ground."
The princess nodded, and to the road did wend. But soon she stopped, and turned, and hugged her last friend. The squire's shock was compounded by this, and his arms moved as if he hugged a cactus. He embraced her with barely more than his wrists, and thus he stood for many long minutes, nonplussed.
Thank you.
She said at last.
I can't repay the matchless service you've done to keep me safe.
By my troth, princess, it was my duty, and it remains my honour to be your guard. And let it be said, you strove valiantly when all seemed lost and hope felt all too far. It was by your urging that the pinioned dead called out their volley of names, and their chains shed. The princess smiled, nodded, and then released the squire, taking his arm as decorum required one to escort a royal lady, and, contented, they walked neath the sky grown glum.
The singers will have a tale most strange to tell the people. They'll think us deranged.
For 5 days they walked the gloomy roadway, warmed by the gifted cloaks, sustained by the fare of the reaper's wood. Through the long nights they stayed beside trees and hills, finding comfort anywhere. On the 6th day they saw on the horizon chimney smoke and the towers of Castle Adgeton. The signet ring of the royal household served to identify the princess at the gate. She and her guard were swiftly brought to the old castle, which was moved to a riotous state. Completely unlooked for had the princess come, and for proper courtesy much needed be done.
They stayed in the castle till word could be sent to Eschville and Fenelorn, telling all the fantastic events of the day spent beyond the world, to unearthly battle called. Not unknown were magic-wrought wonders and fears, yet the kingdom had not seen their like in years. 2 veteran regiments led by the Queen this time were sent out to vouchsafe the princess to Fenelorn. Though now there was naught to be seen of peril, vigilance was kept none the less. The Queen had been grievously shook by the news from her daughter, and scarce let her out of view.
And to Tanith she showed a monarch's gratitude. His first reward she bestowed almost on sight, bidding the Squire to kneel in view of many noble witnesses, and rise a knight. He was Sir Tanith, Knight of the Manticores, and appointed to the royal guard evermore. He was bidden to serve as he had nobly done, as the stalwart guard of Princess Thea, protecting her and her children to come, as sworn guardian, a terrific honor, and his first happy task in his new state was as guard captain upon her wedding day.
There were few dry eyes indeed when the princess met once more her betrothed, the lordling Fernil. Great had been the doubts and fears to oppress his young heart, whispering they'd ne'er again meet. Then Fernil ran through Fenelorn's streets once his ears heard the trumpets, proclaiming his love was near. Since a runner came bearing the tidings of the death and peril surrounding Thea, the wait through winter was doubly maddening, and he could only wait, and wait, and wait for her. Yet every pain which caused his soul such harm meant nothing once he held her in his arms.
So too the wretchedness of the shadows faded for Thea and Tanith both that day. 'Twas as if all of life's ills were pinioned alone, in oddly shaped trees, entire worlds away. It was at this point the Queen thought it wise to reveal her second fiendish surprise. A hand touched Tanith's shoulder, and he turned to see one of the Queen's cowled attendants, whom he had seen day after day, but there he learned just who else on this journey had been sent. The hood was drawn back, and Tanith was shocked to see the smiling face of Emma, his wife-to-be.
This shock took Tanith's wits almost as much as the enchanted sights, good and ill, he'd seen. But, like before, their swift embrace drove such shock and sluggishness out, and welcomed in glee. Over all this the Queen stood, replete with pride, and, with a grin, revealed her last surprise.
Hear me, my children and my friends. Hear me. A pox on a lethargic winter's wait. In 3 weeks, my daughter and Fernal shall marry, and Sir Tanith and his betrothed the next day. Such I intended when I brought the girl. For who here has patience for spring to unfurl?
A cheer went up from the shivering crowd of curious onlookers who had appeared. Both loveliness and winter's grasp they'd found, and delighted to have two such weddings near. Fenelorn was set alight with excitement, preparing feasts, flowers, music, and raiment.
The brides and grooms stayed separate for the weeks, waiting as tradition bid for their weddings. Yet beside her new mistress Emma stayed, and Fernal would often with Tanith speak. Fast friends did each become with each other, less masters and servants than sisters and brothers. What was almost a forced march brought the guests from Asheville and every edge of the kingdom. For all to arrive proved a grueling test, but ere the wedding day, everyone had come. To Tanith was another surprise sent, when found and squeezed by his travel-worn parents.
Emma, the daughter of a Manticore knight, thankfully not one overcome on the eve of what Princess Thea called false reaping night, was one of the first the parent to receive. When came the summons, he'd ridden night and day, unwilling to miss his daughter's wedding day. Thea could not help but notice a softness not often seen in her royal mother as the two commissioned a wedding dress, which the Queen decreed must outshine all others. The duties of the crown gave her little time for family, which had often seemed unkind.
But for those weeks, with no duty beyond preparing for 2 days of celebration, with the kingdom watched o'er by her brother's son, she could, for once, revel in the occasion. In due course, Thea's 2 sisters arrived. Much cheer and laughter marked the family's time. Slowly for some, far too quickly for most, the day of the royal wedding arrived. So strangely for a November day, the host of dark, beastly clouds above did subside. The sun and sky above were worthy of spring. The folk of Fenelorn took it for a blessing.
The great cathedral was crowded with guests, as were the streets for several miles back. None stayed home that day. Everyone was pressed tightly together, filling every gap. There they waited eagerly for the signs that the princess's procession was nigh. First came the bells, a melodious sound from the cathedral's spire. Then in answer, trumpets, drums, horns, and wild cheers were found. Towards the bells, coming steadily closer, the praise and musicians followed Thea, who, from her carriage, waved to all who saw her.
Within the cathedral, Lordling Fernal stood before the altar, feeling every stare, from every guest, and guard, and minstrel, and cook, and every other person gathered there. Nonetheless, this was the day of all his days, and almost at an end was the endless wait. Tanith and the guards he now commanded were stationed within and without the cathedral, clad in the ornate armor demanded, ready to act should any hazard befall. The young commander felt dwarfed and absurd by his new status, no matter how well deserved.
A fanfare from without and a herald's call silenced the room as the sunlit figure of the princess appeared. Music filled the hall, compounding the moment mickle of splendour. Thea glistened as light struck the diamonds woven through her dress and train as she walked on. Not even the smallest fly troubled the scene, and the joy of it was shared far and wide, and in short order the two were married, and all applauded as the groom kissed the bride. The feasting and revelry to follow left no heart sad, and no stomach hollow.
The princess and knight both felt such relief, alongside unshakable satisfaction. To be here now almost defied belief, yet here they were, by valorous action. They wondered how fared the deposed Shadow's queen. Less cheerful for her must these weeks have been. Day gave way to a warm and cloudless night, and after little enough sleep for many, and though hangovers struck the town like a blight, the next day, like the last, would not pass sluggishly. And while a knight's wedding would not be the show a princess's was, crowds came to cheer a hero.
The queen had given instructions to the town what was to be done for the second wedding. Of her plans Tanith saw no sign nor heard a sound. When dawn came he knew not where he ought be heading, but he woke to the sound of Lord Fernel's call, who awaited him in the castle's hall. The young lord was grinning when Tanith saw him, and it is said he grinned for many days. "Time's against us, friend," he said to his captain. "We must get you ready. With me now, make haste." Fernel and a brace of servants bore away the perplexed young knight, to be dressed and shaved.
After a flurry of swift ablutions, he was given a suit fit for a prince, a gift from Fernel's father, restitution and reward for pains and bravery since first leaving Asheville. 'Twas just the start, he'd said to the overwhelmed Tanith, whose face turned swiftly red. This time the path led not through the city streets, but through the gates to the country beyond. On horseback they rode some miles to meet a new, huge crowd and the wedding party beyond. There were tents and tables, bunting and laughter, and soon there'd be Emma with him at the center.
Princess Thea was there, as was the queen. Alongside them were sat his parents. Each were dressed in their old uniforms from when they had been a soldier and a scout for good King Burgess. He returned their teary smiles as he strode up the velvet carpet to await his betrothed. Time allowed for hugs and last well-wishings, and Thea confided just how excited Emma had been through the weeks of waiting. At times she'd urged the moon to hasten its tread, yet before Tanith could react to such news, all was silenced by the growing sound of hooves.
Tradition for the daughter of a Manticore was that the bride be sat upon a palfrey, with an honor guard of knights numbering 4. Behind these, squires escorted the bridesmaids. Such a sight appeared o'er a nearby hill's crest, and Tanith's heart beat jubilant beneath his breast. Soon Sir Arthur, Emma's father, dismounted, and he took the reins of his daughter's horse, leading both up the carpet till he halted before the altar.
"This union I endorse with great pride and joy. Of doubts I have none for the character of he who shall be my son." Emma climbed down. The palfrey was led away by a squire as Sir Arthur took the hand of his daughter and placed it in Tanith's, who lifted the veil above his love's face. His heart, again, was spurred. The ceremony started, and in due course the two spoke, "I do," their overwhelmed voices hoarse. A grand celebration followed the wedding, albeit a more sedate one than last night's. Tables were packed with fine food for feasting, and the wines most beloved of Manticore nights. Minstrels played and sang throughout the day, and there were dances and games on that sunny glade.
The next day, winter and its clouds returned, yet there was little dent in Fenelon's mirth. Thea and Tanith settled in the lives they'd earned. Long and happy were their years, and mickle of worth. Adventure never came for them again. And yet, it had a task for their children.
One prince and one Manticore knight's daughter.
Were to face a quest contrived by destiny,
Through the mind of a mad god they would wander.
and brave the perils of a feasting sea.
Another story for another day.
When the time is right, much more shall we say.
you.